Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I'm lucky enough to chat with actor Chris Agos about playing Buzz Aldrin on the upcoming Apple TV series For All Mankind. It takes an alternate look at history, where the Soviets beat us to the moon, and I can't wait to see how exactly they play with history. Chris and I talk about his personal love for the space program, getting to be a nerd on set, and much more. Hope you enjoy. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for making time today.
No problem.
I think For All Mankind is a show that, anything coming out on the new Apple TV is going to be a show that everybody's definitely going to go pay attention to for a minute, at least. And for me, I'm a sucker for alternate history. And I always love the sci-fi fun of what if this happened instead, and that kind of exploration. The show's got such a great pedigree.
Yeah.
The first thing that popped into my mind when I saw that you were playing Buzz Aldrin was how the punch out would go. Like, I was imagining like an older Buzz and a kid coming up going, "The Soviets never really went to the moon," and him just decking him. Because that's most of my modern memory, I think, of Buzz is him laying that kid out.
It's funny you mentioned that.
For you, when you first heard about the role and who you would be, but that it would be alternate history, what were the first things that went through your mind of where this might go?
Well, honestly, the first thing I thought of when I found out I was actually going to be playing Buzz was I was excited to put on a spacesuit and get to play with it, because I'm a guy who typically, puts on a suit and tie and goes in front of a camera and plays. So the prospect of living out my 9 or 10-year-old dreams of actually, having a spacesuit on and getting to go and jump in a spaceship and push buttons and, flip levers and do all that stuff. That was my immediate reaction, was like, this is going to be so cool. And then thinking about, playing Buzz, you sort of, so there was that wave of excitement. And then there was another wave of excitement in terms of the story we'll get to tell, because at the time I didn't know a whole lot about the direction the story was going to go in, or what the intention was, behind the series. I just kind of knew I had a little bit of an inkling, but not many details at that point. So when I first found out, I had no idea what plans were in store, for Buzz. And then after that, I started to get, a little bit more concerned about oh gosh, not only am I going to be playing a historical figure, but that historical figure is also still alive. He's still around. And so there's a lot of, there's a reasonable expectation that he'll, watch the show. And that kind of ramps the pressure up just a little bit, because not only is my job to do, as an actor, to do justice to the words on the page and tell the story the way that the writers and the producers sort of want to tell the story, but also to do justice to, who Buzz was and is in real life. So it was kind of a lot to think about right at first, and particularly without having a lot of information about what the show was ultimately going to be about. There was a lot of guessing, and until we finally started to get scripts and I started having conversations, and then it just became a lot of fun.
I read an interview with you from a few years ago where they'd asked if you could swap places with anyone, and I think you'd said someone on the International Space Station. And so I'd assumed that you had to have been
yes.
some level of a space nerd kid, or enjoy that kind of science. Do you remember what first got you into space and science?
Well, I would probably say, I grew up in the 70s, so I grew up during the era of the original Star Wars movies, and that was my first exposure to science fiction. So I spent a lot of time in my basement reenacting the original Star Wars movie. And then, of course, as I got a little bit older, I was growing up in the space shuttle era, which, of course, came, years and years after the Apollo era. Mm-hmm. And it was a much different kind of mission. But my school, as a kid, as a lot of elementary school kids during the late 70s, early 80s, and beyond, really followed the space shuttle program pretty carefully. And in fact, one of those moments that I remember where I was when, like those important moments that kind of happen in your life, was of course the Challenger disaster.
Yeah,
and I remember where
huge
I was standing in 1986. I remember who I was talking to when the news came out. Someone walked by. I was talking to my music teacher in the hallway of my school. We were talking about something, and someone literally walked by and said, "Hey, did you hear about the space shuttle?" So that was, sort of an important event. And I've just always had this fascination and interest in space and science, and so to get to actually be able to, live in that world a little bit for a short amount of time was just super, super exciting and just fascinating to do all the research and dig up all of the necessary backstory that I kind of needed to be able to do the job. It was just really a lot of fun.
I would imagine as an actor, this particular role would have an extra kind of layer of fun to it of getting to, like you said, it's difficult to do research and play a live historical figure who is still present and may still get asked to weigh in on what he thought. But it's got to be a little fun to both, based on a real person, knowing that it's going to be fictionalized by the inherent premise of the show. What was it interesting finding that balance between research and what Moore was going to do with the plot?
It was, to your point about the research was the best part of the job, as far as I'm concerned, because, being born in the 70s, I was born after the moon landing, after the Apollo 11 program, and for me, it had always just been there. It was sort of like background noise. That was something that we had done. But because I wasn't around to go through it, I had no idea what the impact of that event was and what it had not only on the country, but also on the world. And so going back and discovering that part of it, just how big a deal it was really fascinating, because I don't think there's been an event like that in my lifetime, in the sense that it was an accomplishment. There was really nothing negative about it. It wasn't a disaster. It was very unifying. Everyone was fascinated. They were literally bringing TVs out into the streets in Africa so that people could watch the television transmissions from the moon. And it was an amazingly unifying experience for everyone alive at the time. And I really didn't know that, or at least I had no relationship to that before I started jumping into the research to be able to, work on the show. So that part of it was really great. I have a new appreciation for not only the whole Apollo 11, the Apollo program and what was accomplished, but the moon landing itself. But then also, you're right, we're telling a fictional story in the end, populated with real, people and events that took place. So it was a bit of a challenge to try to figure out, okay, we don't have to work out this thing step by step. We don't have to get it exactly correct as it happened on the day, because we're putting our own twist on it. We get to change things a little bit here and there. And so that was fun to kind of parse down, what really happened. And of course, we want to get those things correct, but also to experiment a little bit with the stuff that didn't actually happen, and we had a little bit more flexibility. So it was kind of playing two sides of the coin at the same time.
In terms of, I would imagine thinking, this is going to be the greatest little kid moment of my life. I'm going to get to go spend a day basically monkeying around with all of this space props. But then I know the realities of shooting can be grueling, and you might end up just hanging out in some wires for several hours or what. Was it as fun as you thought it would be to get to go and play around on set? Was there a best moment or a coolest prop that you got to mess with?
Yeah, I'm really conflicted about the suits, and I'll just start off by saying shooting in the suits. You're right, was really difficult. And I mean, look, I say difficult in the sense that, it just wasn't what I expected. I guess I expected them to sort of wear and feel like a Halloween costume. You put it on, it's nice and flexible and easy to move in. And when you zip it up, there's some way for air to get in and it never gets hot. And that's honest to God, that was my expectation. And then of course, none of that was the truth. So shooting it was at the very first fitting for the suit. I put it on and it's like, 60 pounds just sitting there. And that's before they add all the equipment to the helmet or anything. So there's the weight of it. And then it's also very restrictive. Our suits were constructed out of material very similar to the original suits, but in order to develop the bulk and to make it look right, I think there are something like 7 or 8 layers of fabric that are in the construction. So there's just a lot of bulky material there. And when you zip it up and you put the helmet on, it's a fully sealed system. Like there's no way for air to get in or out. So, we had actual functioning airflow valves and we had to have what kind of looked like a backpack, that was acting as a fan and it would circulate cool air through. We had to have those either on us or next to us at all times. It was really involved, and that added to the whole cool factor of it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, wow, not only are we actually getting to do this stuff, but we're getting to use materials and props and everything that are as close to the real thing as possible. But it was just a physically much more demanding experience than I remember it, than I thought it was going to be. And so it got to a point where, we had several days in the suits, and every time we started putting the suits on, it was like, I don't really feel like it today, or this is one of those things that, like, oh man, we got to get back in, and I got to sweat my rear end off again. But at the end of every day, you just kind of have to remind yourself, like, how often are you going to get to do this? Are you ever going to get to do this again? I tried to enjoy it for as much as I could while I was doing it, because it was really unique and very special, and I just appreciated the opportunity to be able to do that so much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, because I think you're right. All the roles that I've gotten to see you on, you're either on House of Cards or as ASA Cot on either of the Chicago shows, and you've always got the suit. You've got to weigh in on the room of like, come on guys, let's get serious. This isn't legal. And I'm really, when I saw that you were going to get to play not just an astronaut, knowing that you were a bit of a space geek, but Buzz, who, I mean, just on name alone, is the fun astronaut. He's the Ringo. Come on.
He is, yeah.
Is there a favorite moment overall so far that you've gotten to have just in being part of the show?
A favorite moment. The moment I walked into our mission control set, I think, is an unforgettable moment that that really sticks in my mind as being a favorite. I kind of tiptoed past the set back and forth for a couple of days because they were still working on it. It wasn't quite finished yet. They weren't allowing just anyone to walk through. And I don't know how much you know about the show and the effort to be as realistic as possible, but there was a mission to be as historically correct on the things that needed to be as they possibly could be. And I think the best expression of that is the room that was built as mission control. It is an exact replica of the original down to the inch. And so to walk into that room for the first time, it was like walking into a history book, because we've all seen the mission control room a million times in film or in pictures or online. But to physically be inside of it was a surreal experience that I don't think I've had before. You know, I've been to presidential museums and I've seen the replicas of the Oval Office, and, you know, the Oval Office on the set of House of Cards was an amazing space, but it wasn't an exact replica of a space that existed, you know, that I've seen in pictures for decades. And so to walk in and to see all the medallions up on the wall, and to see all the consoles that were, some of which were borrowed from museums and others of which were you know, built, and to see all the ashtrays and the 1969 calendars and the junk food wrappers from the vending machines that would have been, you know, that would have been in the halls of NASA during that era. It was a really memorable experience just being there. And in fact, it was my favorite place to go. The entire time we were shooting, if I could find a reason to step into mission control and just be there, I would. So that was the most memorable thing about doing this whole job.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about it, but I can't imagine that ability to have that room at work where on your break you could steal a moment there. I mean, you know, if you're a theater kid in high school, everybody snuck into the middle of the stage and stood there for a second like it's yours. But like you said, walking into something that's been in the background of every kind of really wondrous photo for science, you know, from when you were a kid, has to just be amazing. And I love the logic game of the real history as accurate as it can be, so that you have something to hang the variant on, so that when it plays with historical fiction, you've got realism to ground it.
Exactly. You know, I think that just that's what makes the show, you know, a little bit different than your sort of standard scripted show. Is you know, you do have that responsibility, you know, to get the historical stuff correct. And we had folks on set who are our taskmasters. You know, they were there to make sure that we were pressing the right buttons and the gauges were reading correctly for the situation. And, you know, I wanted to just give a shout out to Mike and Denise Okuda, who were our tech consultants on the show. One of them, and they were the ones that were in charge of making the astronauts look good. So all of us astronauts had to, you know, look like we knew what we were doing. But beyond that, they were present just to answer our questions, because there were things in the script that, you know, we're not engineers, we're not scientists, we don't know what they mean. They're acronyms, like NASA loves its acronyms. And so it was, you know, they were always there to not only explain what we were looking at, but also just to share stories about the actual Apollo 11 mission and what took place then. And my favorite story was that this didn't happen on the day I was there, but apparently there was a moment where sort of the entire cast was in mission control, and that's something ridiculous, like 25 cast members plus background. There's like 100 people in this room, and they were shooting something, and one of the actors had to hit a button or do something on one of the consoles, and no one really knew what the correct setting for the console was. And so Mike Okuda was like, who do I know that might actually give us the answer to this question so that we get it right? And he made a couple of phone calls and eventually tracked down the actual engineer who sat at that console during the Apollo 11 mission. Like, that was his job. And we asked him that question, and he was like, oh, yeah, you just do this and this. I mean, so Mike Okuda, I don't know where he gets those connections, but he knows everybody. And he was able to track down that information. It was just the level of detail that the production team, went through was just astounding. It was just amazing.
Well, I'm even more excited to see it now, and I really can't wait to see your work in it. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me about it.
All right, thanks so much. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you, Chris.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/tvdudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @tvdudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.